Welcome to the Fenton History Center. This is the June lecture, and we're really excited to have Dr. Smagner here. I wanted to say a couple things before we started, just to let you know what's coming up. We just added a new event on the 25th of June, Thursday, next Thursday. Dr. Ed Davis, who used to live in the area, has written 2 books. One is 2 volumes. It's about steamboats that were on the lake, and they're large books because he went through the newspapers and extracted everything about steamboats from, like, I don't know, 1850 forward. So, and there's lots of pictures in the books, but he's going to talk about that set of books. And then also he just finished a book called Life in a Chautauqua Lake Resort Community, and it is about the early years of Point Chautauqua, New York. So that book will also be available. He'll talk about that. We do not have them printed yet, so we will take pre-order at that time. So I just wanted you to be aware of that event happening. And then July 3rd, we're doing our version of the 250th birthday of the country. So we're having an ice cream social, partially because the next day is Reuben Fenton's birthday on the 4th. And they used to, in the past, here at Fenton, they used to have ice cream socials on the 4th of July as well. So we're kind of blending that all together. So that'll be happening July 3rd. I suggest you pick up one of our newsletters if you do not have one already, because there's many events in there over the next month or so, plus our historic walking tours. The next one, by the way, the one on August 8th, will feature the First Presbyterian Church. So keep that in mind if you're interested. Okay, now we can get to the real meat of the evening. John Smagner is a lecturer of art history, theory, and criticism at the University of Chicago.
At the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
What he said. He has a Bachelor's of Science from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, a Master's of Art from the University of Chicago, a PhD from the University of Kansas, and he couldn't give up. He now has a Master's of Science from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where all his stuff that he does now comes from. Right. And he, in his biography, he writes, prior to a career in architectural history, he was a successful developmental psychologist and entrepreneur. With a passion for architecture and photography, he returned to graduate school in architectural history and preservation at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2018. Part of his training included an internship with the New York Landmarks Conservancy in New York City. He received additional training in architectural photography at the Chicago Photography School. His husband's sabbatical during the 22-23 academic school year allowed them the opportunity to travel to 25 countries. And what does he do? 25 countries to see the monuments John had learned about in class. They traveled throughout Europe, North Africa, and West Asia, visiting and photographing architectural monuments from prehistory to present day. John turns to these photographs and experiences when teaching and sharing his knowledge and passion for architecture. He is happiest when traveling the world with his camera, tripod, and lenses so that he can explore architectural masterpieces from new angles and perspectives. John's professional interests include 19th and early 20th century ecclesiastical, that's a college word, church and residential architecture, I knew that. Particularly the work of American architect Ralph Adams Cram. He recently wrote the successful National Register of Historic Places nomination for First Presbyterian Church that Cram designed in 1927 in Jamestown, New York, where he was born. John has photographed 60 buildings located in the United States, France, and Canada that were designed by Cram. Welcome.
Thank you.
And now this is all yours.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, I am very, very happy to be here. And This slide is not the same as the slides on my computer. They're the same slides, but I'm operating this with this contraption and then advancing. So I hope I can keep these coordinated. And if I get off, if something doesn't seem right or I'm talking about a picture that you're not seeing, please let me know. So to begin, thank you to the Fenton History Center for inviting me to give this talk on First Presbyterian Church. Like it was said, my name is John Smagner. I'm now a lecturer of architectural history at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I wrote the nomination for listing First Presbyterian Church in the National Register of Historic Places, which was a multi-step, multi-year process requiring careful research and documentation of the building. And actually, this project began as a master's thesis in May of 2019. So I've been working on this for a while. And we are here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the sanctuary's completion. The sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church is a unique work of art by Ralph Adams Cram, a master architect and leader of the arts and crafts movement in the United States, who was, as you will learn, strongly influenced by the English art critic John Ruskin. There we go. I am proud to say the National Park Service granted final approval of the nomination and officially listed the church in the National Register on April 28, 2025. Tonight, I am thrilled to share insights I learned about the sanctuary and its architect by completing the nomination process, though unfortunately, I have time to only share a fraction of what I learned. So this will be about 3 hours, so I hope everyone is, and that's just a touching the surface. One of my earliest discoveries was the 2 black and white images you see on the screen. These photographs were taken by professional photographer and First Presbyterian Church member William Schindel Bailey. They are 2 of 6 images by Mr. Bailey that were published in a monograph of Cram's work in 1929. These historic images prove the sanctuary has excellent architectural integrity, meaning very few changes have occurred to the building over the last 100 years. The building retains its original design features, and as these photos prove, its high level of masonry craftsmanship. Before I begin, I want to recognize Barb Cessna's contribution to this research project and dedicate tonight's presentation to her. Barb tracked down numerous historic newspaper articles stored on microfiche at the Prendergast Library, as well as historic drawings and photographs like this one that I included in the nomination. Incredibly, Barb discovered the architecture firm's original contract and a complete set of the firm's specifications and drawings. And I wish we had time for that story because it's really quite an incredible story. The specifications not only explain how the sanctuary was built, but they also identify the materials that were used in its construction. In some cases, they even tell us the brand name of certain materials and where they were sourced. The specifications were revealing. For example, they tell us the bricks were sourced from the Elk Fire Brick Company of St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. The bricks were to be hard burned, sand struck, and carefully proportioned in 4 shades of red. Yes, Cram originally designed a red brick church. Tonight we are here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the completion of the sanctuary. The sanctuary, however, is only one part of a large building complex comprised of 6 interconnected structures that were built during 3 campaigns that took place between 1925 and 1992. The complex includes the parish house, annex, education building, chapel, and cloister, but I will focus mainly on the sanctuary. But we should all plan to gather here in 2063 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the chapel's completion with its collection of magnificent windows by the French artist Gabriel Leroy. I'll begin with a brief timeline which starts on the evening of Thursday, May 4th, 1922. This is when the Board of Trustees resolved to sell the property at the corner of 3rd and Cherry Streets, where the Presbyterian congregation had worshiped since its founding in 1834. On the left is an early sketch of the church where this meeting took place. I discovered this rendering in a book on the work of Cassadaga-born architect Milton Earl Beebe, published in 1895. On the right is a colorized photograph of the church, a red brick neo-Gothic edifice that was completed in 1879. It replaced an earlier wood-framed Greek Revival church from 1834 that was destroyed by fire in 1877. The following Sunday, May 7th, the trustees' plan to sell the church property was announced in the church bulletin, which you see here. The announcement partially read, "The sale of the present site was ordered and authorized in the church meeting held last Thursday evening. The next step is a new site and the erection of an edifice. Now every member of the church and congregation gather strength, energy, and resolution for the undertaking." I could not find an explanation for why the church should be sold. Minutes from the trustees' meeting do not survive, but we can speculate. The building was 43 years old and last remodeled in 1903, so it may have begun to show signs of deterioration, or the congregation may simply have outgrown the space and there was no more room on the lot to expand. As you can see in this announcement, the congregation welcomed 21 new members just on that Sunday. Downtown Jamestown in 1922 was also a very different place compared to 1834, the year the congregation was established and the first church building erected. Industrialization, the railroad, and the introduction of a trolley system brought about a concentration of industrial, business, and commercial activity to the downtown. Residents had moved uphill to residential neighborhoods away from the city center. Charles Herrick, president of the Board of Trustees with ties to the furniture manufacturing industry, lived in a grand Queen Anne-style house at the corner of Pine and 6th Street, and that house still stands today. During this period, it was not unusual for congregations in growing cities to abandon their original downtown properties and move the church closer to their homes. I learned the same thing happened in Lincoln, Nebraska, when I visited First Presbyterian Church, another Presbyterian church designed by Cram that was also built in 1926. As we will learn, First Presbyterian Church had several members in leadership positions, like Charles Herrick, who were successful, civic-minded folks. It may simply have been the case that church members wished to abandon what they perceived as an old, outdated, and overly extravagant Victorian church. They desired something new and modern that was designed by a famous architect, arguably the most famous ecclesiastical architect in the country, Ralph Adams Cram. Immediately following the trustees' announcement, a general committee on site and church edifice was formed. This church committee reflected the interests of various members and church groups, including the pastor, missionary society, needlework guild, Sunday school, elders, trustees, and a group called the Thelians, for which I could not find any definition, though other Presbyterian congregations also had Thelian societies during this time period. 1 month later, on June 12, 1922, the committee, having considered 4 sites, selected the property at the northwest corner of Prendergast Avenue and 5th Street. This property belonged to the estate of Martin Luther Fenton, a local businessman who had passed away the previous February in Daytona, Florida. Mr. Fenton's obituary described him as a well-known Jamestown capitalist. He had owned a hardware store and later, with his son, had established the M.L. and Thomas J. Fenton Lumber Company. Mr. Fenton was a prolific builder in Jamestown, having constructed several houses and building blocks, including the Fenton Building at the corner of Main and 2nd Streets, begun in 1900. The newly acquired property, measuring 170 by 120 feet, included Mr. Fenton's house, a stately 3-story colonial revival mansion designed by New York City architect Ernest George Washington Dietrich. The house was completed in the spring of 1897, and in September 1898, it was featured in the magazine Art Interchange, a popular interior design magazine published in New York. Here, we see a rendering of the house, as well as the plans for the 1st and 2nd floor. The article described the 3rd floor as having rooms for storage and an identified number of additional bedrooms. The sale did not include the house at the corner of Prendergast Avenue and 6th Street, also owned by Mr. Fenton's estate. This house at 517 Prendergast Avenue was built in 1877. The Sanborn fire insurance map on the left from 1896 shows the Fenton house, or Fenton mansion, under construction, as well as the house at 517 Prendergast Avenue. This block is significant because it is the northeasternmost block of the city's original street grid, going back to 1815. Thomas Disher's map on the right shows Jamestown was composed of square blocks divided in half by a narrow alley and further subdivided into 10 parcels, each measuring 50 by 120 feet. Between 1873 and 1876, Mr. Fenton acquired all 5 properties on the east side of the block for redevelopment. In 1945, church member Clyde Carnahan purchased 517 Prendergast Avenue from Thomas Fenton. Later, Mr. Carnahan donated it to the church. The house was torn down in 1952, and that's what you see in this image, and a lawn, garden, and the church's first off-street parking lot was built. The 3 sites rejected by the committee were all located along 5th Street. The sites were located at the southwest corner of Main and 5th Street, the southwest corner of Pine and East 5th Streets, and the northeast corner of Prendergast Avenue and 5th Street, directly across from the site that was selected. The 2 mansion from 1882 is located at the southwest corner of Main and 5th Streets. Had the committee selected this site, Jamestown would have lost 2 buildings designed by Milton Beebe. Incidentally, church member George II Jr. had served on the building committee that selected Beebe as the architect for the 1879 church. Mr. II lived until 1923, so I've often wondered if he was aware of and had any thoughts on the plans to tear down the Beebe church, or whether his own house was a potential site, or whether he knew that his own house was a potential site for the new church. Milton Beebe also died in 1923, but I doubt he was aware of the plans to tear down his church. He was living in San Diego after having a very successful career as an architect in North Dakota beginning in 1898. In fact, there is a Milton Earl Beebe Historic District in Fargo, North Dakota, which contains 6 buildings he designed, including his home and office. Also in 1922, a 5-member building committee was formed comprised of Fletcher Goodwill, Mayne Reed Stevenson, Alfred Cookman Davis, Orlando Nelson Rushworth, and Fred Tinkham. Charles Herrick and the church's pastor, Reverend George McClelland, also served on the committee. Fletcher Goodwill, seen in this photograph, chaired the building committee until about June 1926, when Mr. Stevenson took over. Mr. Goodwill's obituary described him as a widely known banker and industrialist, as well as one of the pioneers in Jamestown's development in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mr. Goodwill, with his brother Herbert, organized the Chicago Worsted Mills. He served as treasurer of both the Salisbury Wheel and Axle Company and the Jamestown Hotel Management Corporation, which was the organization that built the Hotel Jamestown on the site of the 3rd Street Church in 1923. In 1922, Mr. Goodwill succeeded his father-in-law, Charles Mason Dow, as president of the National Chautauqua County Bank, a role he held until 1932. Mr. Goodwill and his wife, Alberta Dow Goodwill, lived at 72 Allen Street in this large Italianate-style house that was built by Mrs. Goodwill's parents and Presbyterian Church members Charles and Eleanor Dow. Both Mr. and Mrs. Goodwill were deeply dedicated to First Presbyterian Church, and they each played a significant role in building the new church. I learned from Dr. John Schmidt, pastor of First Presbyterian Church from 1963 to 1982. It was once a well-known fact that the Goodwills offered to pay the architect's fees if the committee selected Ralph Adams Cram to design the new church. Mrs. Goodwill commissioned the 2 windows in the apse above the choir loft in honor of her parents. The church archives contain several letters exchanged between Mrs. Goodwill and Ralph Adams Cram concerning these windows, which are the work of stained glass artist Harry Wright Goodhue. Harry Wright Goodhue was only 21 years old when he crafted these windows in his Boston studio. And sadly, Harry died by suicide in 1931 at the age of 26. I also learned the Goodwills were committed to the betterment of Jamestown and its residents. In 1952, they donated that house we were just looking at to Jamestown Community College, and in 1954, their house became the school's first campus. In 1922, the Boston-based architecture firm of Cram and Ferguson was commissioned to design the new sanctuary. Ralph Adams Cram was the firm's principal designer. A public announcement, though, was not made until December 4th, 1924. That is when the Jamestown Evening Journal published this rendering of the new church and identified Cram as, quote, the Dean of American Church Architects. Local architects Ellis Beck and Norman Tinkham were selected as Cram's associates. Building the sanctuary was a church family affair. Norman Tinkham was the nephew of building committee member Fred Tinkham. The Warren Construction Company was chosen to build the new sanctuary. The Warren Construction Company was owned by church member Victor Rogerson. And the Rogerson family played an important role in bringing about the education building and chapel in the 1960s. James Russell Rogerson, Victor's brother and a Jamestown attorney, served as the chair of that building committee. The cost of the new sanctuary was $250,000, and in 2026 dollars, that means it would cost over $7 million to build this church. The sanctuary would seat 750 people and promised to be both modern and fireproof. Fireproofing was likely an important consideration for this congregation, seeing as how the congregation's first church building was destroyed by fire, and a fire destroyed the interior of that red brick church in 1890. It was, of course, rebuilt. The congregation would suffer 2 more devastating fires in the 20th century, and we'll hear in a bit about one of them. Even before the public announcement was made in the newspaper, Cram and his architects in the office were busy working on the plans for the new sanctuary. The specifications, which I mentioned earlier, are dated March 27, 1924. The first set of blueprints were approved and stamped on January 2, 1925. Drawings for the reliefs and furnishings would soon follow. Here we see the floor plan of the church is based on an ancient Roman basilica, meaning 2 rows of columns divide a rectangular-shaped room into 3 long aisles. The center aisle is called the nave, and that's what's labeled on this drawing. The main door and a semicircular apse are located at opposite ends of this center aisle. As you can see, the floor plan is quite a bit more complex than the basilica I just described. The side aisles, for example, are unusually narrow compared to the basilicas we'll see in a bit. And at the west end, there are additional volumes attached, including a transept or seating area with a tower above, a baptistry, and a vestibule. Ground for the new sanctuary was broken on May 18, 1925, and the cornerstone was laid during a church service held at the site on Sunday, August 2nd, 1925. I don't really have time to get into it, but I have, because it was published in the paper, I have everything that they put inside that cornerstone. And I also have both of the sermons that were delivered on that Sunday morning. Again, we can thank Barb for finding these construction photographs taken by local photographer Henry Black on behalf of the Warren Construction Company. In the photograph on the right, we see some of the sanctuary's distinctive features starting to emerge, including the front porch, bell tower, and the raised roof or clerestory over the center aisle. 1926 would turn out to be an eventful year for the congregation. While work on the sanctuary continued, the Fenton House was nearly completely destroyed by a fire in March. Several extension cords running from the basement of the Fenton House to the construction site next door caught fire. And the fire spread to every floor through a dumbwaiter located right at the center of the house that ran from the basement to the roof. And it just acted like a chimney. The newspaper reported, "Interior of the big house is almost a wreck, and it will be a difficult talk to put the structure in the condition in which it was before the blaze. The entire basement was a mass of fire, and every partition in the structure from the cellar to the attic was afire when the firemen arrived. The fire department had to pump thousands of gallons of water out of the sanctuary's basement." This is where I get to slip in another photograph Barb uncovered. I said the Fenton House was nearly completely destroyed by fire. I chose my words carefully because elements of the first floor survived. On the right is a photo of the sitting room located at the southeast corner of the Fenton House. Today, this is the location of the pastor's study. If you compare the photo of the pastor's office in the upper left corner to the photo of the sitting room, you see the bay window and its wood casing survived. And that's what you see in this photograph here. Despite the fire in mid-March, the new Moeller pipe organ arrived on the 1st of April. The new organ, a gift from Mrs. Elizabeth Marvin, incorporated pipes from the 1891 William Johnson & Son organ that was salvaged from 3rd Street Church. The Moeller organ had 3 manuals, 39 ranks, 4 divisions, and 45 stops, all at a cost of about $14,500. And this is something I learned and didn't know. The church hired an organ consultant by the name of William Meyer of Pittsburgh to design this new organ. Mr. Meyer was an authority on pipe organs, having overseen Andrew Carnegie's many pipe organ donations made to churches and other institutions throughout the United States. Mr. Meyer designed organs of national reputation, including the $20,000 Kimball pipe organ for St. Paul's Roman Catholic Cathedral in Pittsburgh. At the time of its completion in 1901, it was the largest pipe organ Andrew Carnegie had donated in the state of Pennsylvania. A little closer to Jamestown, Mr. Meyer designed the Julius Neef organ for the Ford Chapel at Allegheny College in 1902. 6 days after the organ arrived, the church held its first annual meeting post-fire. Architects Beck and Tinkham presented their plans for a new parish house. The church initially planned to build a 3-story structure, though the finished parish house had only 2 floors and the basement. Beck and Tinkham also designed an annex to connect the new parish house directly to the sanctuary. Until this time, the sanctuary and the Fenton House were freestanding structures. Today, there is evidence of the change in plans. Inside the north vestibule, you will find a window opening next to the back door that's blocked up. And you see it in that photo there. In the photo on the right, you see the south elevation of the Fenton House, including the exterior of that bay window I mentioned earlier that's in the pastor's office. On January 2nd, 1927, the sanctuary was dedicated during the Sunday morning service held at 10:30 a.m. Reverend Dr. George B. Stewart, President Emeritus of Auburn Theological Seminary, was invited to preach. The first hymn sung in the new sanctuary was hymn number 672 in the hymnal 1895, founded on Thee, Our Only Lord, sung to the tune Mendon. The final verse goes, accept the work our hands have wrought, accept, O God, this earthly shrine. Be thou our rock, our life, our thought, and we as living temples thine. Dedicatory events took place throughout the following week. On Monday, Reverend Jamestown's Westminster Presbyterian Church presided at a fellowship service and open house. Clergy from the Congregational, Methodist, Lutheran, and Baptist churches participated in the service. Reverend Wilson from the Baptist Church spoke directly of the still most beloved features of the sanctuary. As I have been sitting here tonight, looking at your church with its beautiful lights, I am reminded of the church in which I worshiped as a lad, a church with its sputtery old lamps that flickered on the walls. Tonight, we are privileged to worship in this church where there are soft, mellow lights which make worship easy, and yet all things stand out clearly. Reverend Wilson's sermon reminds us that in 1927, many adults had grown up with gas lights. This image also reminds me of one very small change that's occurred since 1927. Mr. Cram would not approve of light bulbs shaped like flames. He valued what's, quote, truth to materials. Materials, including light bulbs, should not be disguised to appear as something else. On Tuesday, Henry Siebert, organist at Church of the Holy Trinity in New York City, gave a concert on the new Moeller pipe organ. Mr. Siebert's program included pieces by Bernap, Schubert, Wagner, and Bach. On Wednesday, Reverend James Craig Buchanan from the Gowanda Presbyterian Church presided at a church family night. And on Thursday, January 6th, Frederick C. Ferry, president of Hamilton College, delivered a sermon entitled The Church and the College. Incredibly, the library at Hamilton College retained a copy of President Ferry's sermon from that day, as well as the service bulletin, some of the pages we've seen from the dedicatory service. These are the first 2 pages of Dr. Ferry's sermon, Reverend Ferry observed, "The First Presbyterian Church of Jamestown, which has long proved a bountiful source of inspiration and light in this community, may confidently face the future with its ample and well-adapted equipment. With a long past so rich in achievement, it is warranted in its hope in a future full of effectiveness and crowned with honor." The church celebrated communion for the first time on Sunday, January 9th. Since we're here at the museum and not at the church, I thought we would take a brief tour of the building by way of a few photographs, and I would point out a few interesting architectural features. These interior photographs, also by Mr. Bailey, give us our first look down the nave of the sanctuary, where we see cast stone columns dividing the nave from the side aisle. Cast stone was very popular, became very popular in the 1920s, and it was used not only for the columns, but also the original baptismal font, which does not survive. Although the Boston Public Library, which contains Cram's archive, has the drawings if the church should wish to recreate the lost font. As you can see, all the seating in the sanctuary is located in the nave, providing uninterrupted views of the chancel. Other architectural features to note are the open wood truss roof, columnar choir screen, and raised chancel where the communion table and matching pulpit and reading desk are located. The sanctuary is known for its exceptional acoustics, which can largely be attributed to the placement of the choir loft and the organ chamber on the sanctuary's central axis. The sound travels straight down the center aisle. And I'm very familiar with Fourth Presbyterian Church in Jamestown, also by Cram, which does not have an organ chamber on the central axis, and they have a very difficult time getting the sound down the nave. So it's a very lucky and actually rather unique feature of this particular church by Cram. There are 2 organ chambers in the sanctuary. In the photograph on the right, you see there are 2 organ screens at the clerestory level, which hide the organ chamber located inside what is the upper level of the bell tower. The larger chamber, which is located on the right, has 3 openings, the one I just mentioned above the choir loft, as well as one opening into the chancel and another into the side aisle. These photographs reveal a few changes that have taken place to the interior of the sanctuary. The linoleum floor was removed in the 1990s. Pipes that once decorated the organ screen in the apse have been removed, probably when Hermann Schlicker redesigned the organ in the early 1960s. And finally, it's difficult to see in this photo, but the communion table and chairs were once raised on a wooden platform, which was removed and discarded in the 1960s. I took this photo at about 8 a.m. on a July morning when the lights were turned off and the sunlight was pouring through the clerestory windows, filling the nave with natural light. I have returned to the church many times since this day, but have never seen it illuminated quite like this. Cram allowed an abundance of light to shine through the windows by surrounding each with a wide reveal, which disperses the light throughout the center of the sanctuary. And a couple of things to note as we examine this image. And this is important. Cram designed every element of the building that you see. Every element was designed by the architect. Every part is a unique design by Cram. First Presbyterian Church, therefore, is a total work of art. Cram determined the massing of the church, the location and the hierarchy of its volumes, but he also designed the smallest details, including the columns with their decorative basket weave crosses, the light fixtures with their winged oxen and eagles, symbols of the gospel writers Luke and John, and the classical details of the organ screens. He created designs for the brackets holding up the roof gutters and the brackets for the handrails in the narthex. He determined the subjects and the detail of every Christian symbol found on the exterior of the church. Cram designed the chancel furnishings, the communion table, chairs, matching ambones. The Boston Public Library has the plans for the communion table, chairs, organ screens, and pews. This photograph also reveals three important elements of Cram's design approach: irregularity, asymmetry, and variety. Look carefully, and you will begin to see that one side of the building is not a mirror of the opposite side. There are organ screens on the left side of the clerestory, but not on the right. There is an entrance on the left, not on the right. The organ screen on the right side of the apse is not repeated on the left side. The south side aisle on the left is shorter and terminates at an arch, but the north side aisle extends the full length of the sanctuary. The nave columns proceed uninterrupted down the right side of the sanctuary, but the procession is interrupted by a pier on the left, which is the northeast corner of the bell tower. Also, note how the rounded arch repeats again and again in the triumphal arch over the chancel, the nave arcades, the light fixtures, window openings, and in the furnishings, creating a unified design and a symbol of the artists from the various trades working in collaboration with one another. And variety. There are a variety of window sizes and shapes throughout the sanctuary. Same with the vaulting systems found throughout the building. There are barrel vaults over the baptistry and chancel, a segmental vault over the narthex, a cross vault over the transept, and a half dome over the apse. Cram tried to take things a step further by proposing green and white marble columns in the nave with non-identical capitals, meaning each one would be unique. Those plans were never carried out. Instead, we have the cast stone columns. Perhaps the marble columns were too expensive, or members found them too ostentatious. This photograph allows us to admire the quality of the materials and craftsmanship. All the wood furnishings, including the chancel furniture, pews, and organ screens, were executed by local craftsmen in Jamestown. The quality of the stone carving is equally exceptional, as are the marble panels at the base of the choir screen. The marble panels behind the communion table are called revetment, a wall decoration that comes to us from the Romans and can be seen in the Pantheon in Rome. They require an experienced mason who could carefully cut a marble block not once but twice into 4 thin slabs and then align the veining. Cram deliberately designed churches with the intention of reviving medieval craftsmanship. Cram was famous for identifying talented artisans who worked in stone, wood, stained glass, and metal. At the rear of the church, there is a finely crafted narthex screen decorated with rosettes and a banister surrounding the gallery above. Here we see some of the details in the wood carving, including the interlacing pattern called guilloche. The east end of the church was reorganized in the 1990s, but the church thankfully retained the original narthex screen, doors, and banister. This photograph again reveals aspects of Cram's design approach. Here we see a variety of window styles and roof lines, including gable, pyramidal, and shed-style roofs. The church is designed for its site, with the most elaborate and detailed elevations facing Prendergast Avenue and 5th Street. The exterior of the church features a combination of buff brick and classical details in limestone. A team of talented masons would have been required to carry out the elaborate scheme. Starting with the front elevation, 2 buttresses divide the facade into 3 sections, and each buttress is decorated with 4 Christian symbols. And these symbols include a ship, an anchor, and a pelican feeding her children from her own breast, a symbol of eternal life. The large wheel-style window features a tetramorph, the 4 symbols associated with each gospel writer, a winged man or angel for Matthew, a winged lion for Mark, a winged ox for Luke, and a winged eagle for John. And there are 2 main doors into the sanctuary. The front door, which is covered by a barrel-vaulted porch and decorated with Christian symbols, including a lamb with a cross. The porch is flanked by dwarf galleries. Those are the little colonnettes and arches linking the porch to the buttresses. The design of the tower follows the conventions of a northern Italian campanile, or bell tower. The tower is square in plan, with walls that rise straight up from the ground and open belfries at the upper stages. Above the cornice, there are 2 attics. The lower one is decorated with a checkerboard pattern called counterchange, and a 7-foot bronze cross sits on top. At the base of the tower, a small vestibule is an entrance, a separate entrance to the baptistry. And now I want to shift gears and tell you a little bit about Ralph Adams Cram. And then I will introduce you to some of the medieval sources of inspiration for the church. Ralph Adams Cram was a prolific architect and author who lived from 1863 to 1942. So he was about 59 years old and well into his career when he was commissioned to design First Presbyterian Church. As an architect, he is best known for designing churches and university campuses, but he also designed residences, libraries, memorials, and all kinds of furniture and church furnishings. He designed West Point Military Academy, Princeton University campus, including its chapel that dates to 1928, so it was built about the same time, and the campus of Wellesley College, among many other college campuses. His firm's work appears throughout the United States, as well as France, Canada, Cuba, and Panama. And here is one of 2 World War I memorial chapels by Cram located outside of Paris. Oh, yes, here we go. Perhaps his most famous work is St. Thomas Church, 5th Avenue in New York City, which Cram designed in collaboration with his then business partner, Bertram Goodhue. St. Thomas was completed in 1913. Cram's biographer, Douglas Shantucci, called St. Thomas Church the finest parish church built since the Middle Ages. The church was partially funded by the Vanderbilt family, which explains why a steam locomotive is carved into one of the choir stalls. Cram was a devout member of the Anglo-Catholic faith, and he therefore designed a great number of Episcopal churches. However, he also designed churches for Unitarian, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Congregational, Methodist, and Presbyterian faith communities. This is Second Presbyterian Church, Springfield, Illinois, Cram's first Presbyterian Church commission, which dates to 1913. East Liberty Presbyterian Church, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was the largest Presbyterian church Cram designed, a project commissioned by banker and industrialist Richard Beatty Mellon and his wife Jenny King, who, according to Cram's biography, demanded the finest example of church building. Cram devoted 3 pages of his autobiography to this church and concluded with this insight: "Neither instructions nor results startled us, for we had long realized that Presbyterians had become about the most ambitious and forward-thinking of all the Protestant denominations." Cram likened East Liberty Presbyterian Church to a cathedral that could be prepared for a high mass with the addition of a crucifix and 6 candles on the communion table. The light fixtures were designed by Cram and made by Samuel Yellen. The Lord's Supper reredos behind the altar was carved by John Angel. Cram definitely had favorite projects. And if you go to his autobiography, he spent a lot of time talking about the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, East Liberty Presbyterian Church, and Knowles Chapel on the campus of Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. That was a very, very highly preferred building. This is House of Hope Presbyterian Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. I include the House of Hope because it has many features in common with the church here in Jamestown, including the transept tower on the left and narthex projections, which contain staircases to the gallery above. The chancel once had a very similar arrangement, which you can see in that little black and white photo, with a shallow chancel and communion tables situated at the center. The chancel was later modified to accommodate seating for a large choir. The pulpit and reading desk were moved outside the chancel, and the pulpit now hangs high on the wall to the left of the chancel. All the Presbyterian churches we have seen, and there are many, many more, are all Gothic in style, identifiable by their sharply pointed window openings. Gothic is the architectural style Cram is most closely associated with. But First Presbyterian Church, Jamestown, is something quite different. Its architecture reflects Venetian, Byzantine, and later Romanesque churches of Italy. These early medieval churches were typically built of brick with 3 aisles and a raised roof over the nave or the center aisle. The sanctuary often was accompanied by a freestanding baptistry and bell tower, and perhaps you're familiar with Pisa Cathedral or the Duomo in Florence. What might explain Cram's experimentation in other architectural styles during this period? There we go. There certainly was a trend in building churches in this neo-Italian Byzantine Romanesque style. St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church on Park Avenue in New York, designed by Bertram Goodhue, Cram's former business partner, is one of the most famous examples in the United States. The little chapel at St. Bart's on the right gives us an idea of what Cram originally had in mind for First Presbyterian Church, including colorful marble columns and non-identical capitals in a contrasting color. St. Catherine's Church in Somerset, Massachusetts was designed by Cram's colleague and friend Charles McGinnis, another Boston-based architect. Cram admired this church so much, he published interior and exterior photos of the church in the 1924 edition of his treatise on church building. McGinnis also designed a much larger Byzantine Romanesque church, which I don't have a photo of, the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. Here we go. Cram's first Italian Byzantine Romanesque building was not a church, but rather the campus of Rice University in Houston, Texas. Cram chose this architectural style because he felt Houston's climate matched the warm Mediterranean climate of Italy. This photo reminds us of those 3 important aspects of Cram's design approach: asymmetry, variety, and irregularity. Like First Presbyterian Church, the administration building features rounded arch windows and doors and stone striping. Architectural historians have pointed out the influence of the Doge's Palace in Venice on Cram's design of the administration building, including the ground floor loggia and combination of brick and stone construction. Cram practiced a learned approach to architecture. His designs were based on close study and examination of medieval European architecture. In his autobiography, he reported having traveled to Italy 4 times throughout his life. In fact, his very first trip to Europe was for the purpose of seeing the architecture John Ruskin had described in The Stones of Venice, a 4-volume book Cram first read at the age of 13. The Stones of Venice was a book historian Robert Hewison believed had created an interest in Byzantine architecture beginning in the 19th century. And Cram believed that by immersing oneself in Venice was the equivalent of immersing oneself in beauty. Venice was, according to Cram, pure beauty. In Venice, Cram saw the mix of architectural styles in one building, including the Basilica of San Marco and the Doge's Palace. He noted the variety of architectural details in the columns of the Doge's Palace, and as you can see, Cram did not copy the buildings he saw, but he drew inspiration from the architecture he encountered there. And all you have to do is look at these two photos, one in Venice and the other in Houston. Now, I'm going to move through this very quickly. I have a number of slides where we look at a number of medieval churches in Italy and then look at First Presbyterian Church. And I think I'll just go through them rather quickly. And I won't talk about every single slide. But here is the Church of San Zeno, which is located in Verona. And I love this. Oh, I forgot to advance it. I can't quite relax yet. Here we go. And you can compare and contrast these photos. Now, I really like how I've laid these out because you can really see the details of both porches. But this porch is probably 3 or 4 times higher than First Presbyterian Church because it's just an absolutely enormous building. But you can see, he didn't copy, but he definitely drew inspiration from this porch. And I've showed this when I gave the talk about 4 years ago at the church, this lovely window at Santa Maria Maggiore, which is in Tuscania, located just north of Rome. And here you can see the influence of that window. This was really kind of a popular window beginning in the 19th century. This window appears at Epiphany Roman Catholic Church in Pittsburgh, and it also appears on Convocation Hall at Mumbai University in India, a work by the English architect George Gilbert Scott. And now we'll look at the Basilica of San Marco in Venice. And you'll probably look at this and wonder what any of this has to do with First Presbyterian Church. And I will show you. This is the inside, and I want you not only to note the rounded arches and the marble columns in the nave, but most important is the chancel screen that divides the sanctuary from the nave. And here's a closer look. And this is very much, I didn't put the compare and contrast photo of the church, but the choir screen at First Presbyterian Church, its layout is much like this. You have columns raised on pedestals with these panels put in between. This has a very elaborate beam across the top. There are many other churches in Italy. I didn't bring photos of all of them, where there are more simple wood beams, much like what we see here in Jamestown. And if you want to spend a little time looking at these, looking at these column capitals, the column capitals on the right were taken from Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The capitals feature birds standing on orbs and lions at each corner. I've not been able to identify the meaning or what buildings they came from, but these, there are 6 of them inside the atrium or narthex of San Marco. And the column capitals on the front porch of First Presbyterian Church are obviously influenced. And if you take a look at this organ screen, the organ screens are inspired by the Porta de Mar, located on the south side of San Marcos Basilica. This was once a main doorway into the atrium, but it was blocked up in 1501, and this classical Renaissance screen was built. And if you look at the screen, the upper portion of the screen in First Presbyterian Church, you see that classical pediment there, and you see that arch. Well, I found the original drawings for the organ screen, and they were that sort of trellis pattern that you see surrounding. That was supposed to be a very elaborate carving of acanthus leaves and grapes, grape bunches. But you see, you can also look at the organ screen in the apse, again, contained within an arch. And if you look at these three panels here, and you compare them to the photo there, you have three panels that are divided by marble columns. And this is actually a tomb inside the atrium of San Marco. And here's a close-up. Here's the original drawing. So there were some changes that were made when those wood panels were executed for Jamestown. However, wandering through St. John the Divine, I found them in a chapel. And they're in bronze, but they are the same pattern that you see at San Marco and in Cram's drawing for Jamestown. Here, this is a window on the front, the west front of San Marco, and these are the organ screens up in the clerestory. Oh, and this is where I should point out that my shirt, which I only wear when I present on the church, has repeating rows of rounded arches. We'll take a quick look at this church because it has an interesting little side porch. And you can see we have peacocks drinking from a fountain that appears on the face of the porch in Venice. And the peacocks are a very popular motif in Venice, and you'll see peacocks all over. But this particular roundel, or medallion, if you will, looks very much. And it also appears in The Stones of Venice by John Ruskin. This is a church, San Frediano in Lucca, and I included the interior shot because it shows you some of those marble columns, and many of the capitals don't match. They were just taken from other buildings, probably gathered up from ancient Roman ruins in the area and used in the construction of the church. But there's also a molding that surrounds the clerestory, just like at First Pres. And I can't help notice that there's a single recessed panel in which those windows are situated on this tower, and that you see that same arrangement at First Presbyterian Church. It's not identical, but it is attached, and it does have that single recessed panel. And you can also see that the number of windows increase as the tower rises, and so that helps kind of lessen the weight of the tower. And I know Cram loved this tower because this is from one of the sketchbooks in the archives at the Boston Library. He made two drawings of this tower. And next we'll go to Ravenna. This is San Apollinare, and you can see bricks creating this counterchange pattern. So this checkerboard pattern was popular in medieval times. It kind of represented good and evil. And this one I think is important for us to talk about. We're just a few minutes after 8. This is San Miniato, which sits high on a hill overlooking Florence. And again, you see the marble columns, but what I want to draw your attention to really is the ceiling, the roof trusses, and particularly the stencil. And this is a closer look at the ceiling, and we can quickly compare the Florence Church and First Presbyterian Church. It's the same color scheme and the pattern. I have actually found this carried out at least 2 different churches here in the United States, at St. John's Episcopal Church in Los Angeles and a Catholic church in Pasadena, California. So it was, and last, I guess I'm going to end on this church and really quickly take a look at this, because I remember when I started this, someone asked, what's the meaning of the stripes on the tower? Well, the broken stripes you see on the church in the image on the right suggests the building has undergone repairs over time. The repairs and the rebuilding have incorporated materials from other older buildings. And the signs of age for architects like Cram working during this period was an important design element. Signs of age, high standards of craftsmanship, quality materials, honesty in construction, variety and asymmetry, and a looking back to the medieval past for inspiration. These are all topics I've incorporated into my talk tonight, and they point to the conclusion that First Presbyterian Church is an arts and crafts church and remains a source of civic pride, not just for the congregation, but for the whole community. And that's it. Yeah, are there any questions or any comments? I was curious if anyone knows the names of the people, because it's all I have are names, but I don't know a lot about, for example, the building committee. I learned a little bit about Fletcher Goodwill. I tracked down his grandchild, who was not familiar with the story of them donating money, and really couldn't help a whole lot in kind of fleshing out the family's relationship. But at the same time, he also said that he wouldn't be surprised by that kind of,
You may have covered this. How did they contract Cram to do this when 2 years later he's doing Princeton?
He had projects going on at the same time all over the world. All over the world. Yes, he did. He did. But somehow he still managed to travel Europe for 4 or 5 months at a time. I mean, when I say he went to Europe, he went a lot. And he didn't go for a week or 2. He went for months. He went for months. Yeah. In fact, the letters that I referenced earlier about the windows, those unfortunately are the only words we have from Cram directly about this project. I have a feeling, because I've visited archives of other projects, there were numerous letters exchanged, and they must have burned in the fire. There was another fire. The Fenton House, the interior of the Fenton House, burned again in '32. So I don't know. They're just. But the letters, those letters, are very interesting, because he explains to Alberta. And I love this because his first letter is to Miss, and Mr. Goodwill replies and says, "Oh, no, no, you must talk to Mrs. Goodwill about these windows." And their grandson said she was a formidable woman. So I trust that she took control, took control of these windows. But he explains to her that all of the stained glass artists that he would recommend are busy on other projects, and he names the chapel Mercersburg Chapel. There's a boys' school near Huntington, and he has all these. It's a very large chapel, and they're all busy. So he sends the work to Harry Wright Goodhue, and he loved Harry Wright Goodhue and wrote an obituary for him when he died, or a memorial. And I've seen some of his other work, and it's extraordinary. There's a Catholic church, Holy Rosary in Pittsburgh, where he did the rose window. I didn't include a lot of information here, but there is really a wonderful, wonderful rose window at the church down in Pittsburgh that Harry Wright did. It's wonderful.
One of the things I don't think you mentioned tonight, but you did cover in your application for the historic registry, was the upper clerestory windows originally were plain opaque glass.
Yes.
In the 1960s, they were replaced by stained glass by the same artist that did the chapel. Artist that you mentioned.
Gabrielle Loire.
That's a different type of window. It's not the traditional leaded glass. It's thick chunks of colored glass set in like a mortar matrix.
That's right.
At the same time, that was in the 60s, I think sometime after the chapel was done. The glass in the rose window was also replaced with that type of glass.
That's right.
And that was apparently probably clear glass originally in there.
You're right. I didn't. First of all, I stopped at. I didn't go beyond 1927, so I did not cover the changes.
I'm not faulting you for missing something.
Yep. I didn't discuss the later changes, but I did not mention that Hope's Windows of Jamestown made all of the other windows, and many of them still survive. Some of you are sitting in this room know that I have made myself a real pain over the last few years, demanding that you come up with all of these documents that I want to see, and sadly we found that they just simply don't exist. I have been harassing Hope's Windows, asking them to go into their archives, because I know they have one, because they also did the windows for Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I know they still have that documentation. But I've been told that they simply don't have, because what I can't tell you with some of those replacement windows is who did them. I don't know who did the windows in the transept, and I don't know who did the windows in the baptistry. Those were the first windows to be replaced in the baptistry in 44, and then the side aisles in 53, and the clerestories in 62, I think. And the organ, of course, had gone under some work. But in general, it retains its integrity. Like I said, even when it was reordered in the 1990s, they kept all of the original woodwork at the rear of the church. Any other questions? No one remembers Mr. and Mrs. Goodwill? Can't tell me. That's what I was afraid of. Sometimes I would harass people to the point where I thought to myself, I think they're going to make something up just to get me off their back. And
This gentleman is Tom Goodwill, but apparently not of those Goodwills.
yes. You're welcome.
Next one, Barb Cessna, who's been named a number of times tonight, is speaking about an interesting veteran story. What was it again? 4 wars and 4 services and 4. This guy, there's a story there, and she can't necessarily uncover all of it because I think somebody's buried all the information. But anyway, it's an interesting story. So come back next, and then the newsletter's on